I'm here on the floor today to talk again about the need for Congress to act, to pass a COVID-19 bill that helps the people we represent. I'm told this is the 20th time I've come to the floor to make this plea, meaning I haven't been all that convincing, I guess. But the reality is there's hope in the air. There's a bipartisan group that's working on a package. I'm part of that group, as is the presiding officer. It's bipartisan, about 5 Democrats, about 5 Republicans. Maybe more significantly, today, the White House apparently made an offer to Speaker Pelosi to re-engage in conversation to try to get to a package that meets the needs of everyone. And the package that was presented was actually very similar to the package that this bipartisan group has been working on over the past few weeks. So there's hope in the air. And that's good, because we need the help, and we need it now. Let's talk for a minute about why we need this help. I would guess that pretty much everybody in this chamber has seen firsthand the health crisis that we are facing. Number of cases is up, the number of people in intensive care is up, hospitalizations are up, and sadly, fatalities have increased. Some of my colleagues in this chamber have had to fight cases of COVID-19 themselves. Thank God they're all okay. But that's not true with everyone we represent. I would bet that everyone in this chamber knows somebody, and probably multiple people, who have had a very tough time or have even succumbed to this terrible disease. Last week, another friend of mine died because of COVID-19. His name is Mike Crabtree. Mike was a county commissioner in Scioto County, Ohio, a friend, a stand-up guy who helped me on a lot of tough issues in Southeast Ohio, always there for his community and for me. Today, of course, we offer our prayers to his wife, Diane, his family, and all of his friends in Scioto County. It's personal. In the face of these personal tragedies and the sad reality that in many states we are now experiencing this higher number of cases. In many states, it's the highest we've had since the beginning of this pandemic. We do have some promising news on one front, and that is on the vaccine front. It now seems clear that later this month, and then over the next 3 to 4 months, help is on the way in the form of very effective new vaccines being developed by Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, and other U.S. manufacturers. The unprecedented support that Congress has provided for vaccine development, the Trump administration's innovative approach to cut bureaucratic red tape through what's called Operation Warp Speed, and the commitment and ingenuity of our researchers who've been working around the clock, our scientists and our manufacturers have combined to put us on a path to having multiple vaccines at unprecedented speed with efficacy rates above 90%. This is incredible. This is good news. Safe, effective vaccines are expected to be available to frontline healthcare workers, first responders, long-term care facilities, and others just in the next few weeks. This is good news. Within the next few months, we would expect that these vaccines would be more broadly available. And hopefully by March, maybe April, pretty much everybody would be able to find a way to get that vaccine free for them, for their family. That has to be our goal here, as quickly as possible to get safe, effective vaccines. I'm concerned, as some of my colleagues know, because I've talked about it a lot, that the number of people who say they're willing to get the vaccine is too low. That's one reason I entered one of the trials myself. I'm in the Janssen J&J trial. And I either got the vaccine or I got a placebo, I don't know. But I did it to be able to go out and talk about it and to tell people these scientists, these experts, the people with the white coats, not the politicians, are the ones calling the shots here on these vaccines. And they're being safe, and they're being careful, and it's going through a process at the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, that's actually more stringent than it was pre-COVID. In other words, to get this emergency use authorization, they have to go through more testing. And they have to show efficacy rates of above 50%, which they normally wouldn't. And that's good. We want us to be safe. But even with all that hard work that's being done, all those scientists, researchers working around the clock, there are some Americans that are unwilling and concerned. And part of it's because some politicians, I think, have played politics with this, and I hate that. And said that somehow in the Trump administration this wouldn't be trusted. Of course, this is not a political game. This is about saving lives. So I'm encouraged by the process that we've seen, and I hope people will sign up. When I got into the trial, the Gallup poll that's being done periodically to determine whether people are saying they're willing to take it or not was at 50%. Only 50% of Americans saying they were comfortable getting the vaccine. That number in the last couple of weeks has gone up to 58%. It's heading in the right direction. We need people to understand that this is based on science, that these vaccines are like the vaccine for smallpox or polio or measles, virtually wiping out these diseases in this country. My dad had polio as a kid. Now people don't even talk about it. That's because of the vaccines. They work. We have to view it that way. It's not like the flu vaccine, frankly. The flu vaccine is only effective about a third of the time. These, what they call efficacy rates, meaning how effective it is, have come in at 90, 95% and higher. So we'll see what the FDA says here in the next couple of weeks, but I'm encouraged that we're likely to get some approvals and likely to begin being able to provide these vaccines for those on the front lines, for those in long-term care facilities, for our first responders, and then out from there to the entire population. Because these vaccines won't be widely available for 3 or 4 months, we need to act here and act now to provide a bridge to more normal times. That's really how I see it. This is a short-term emergency response to a desperate need we have right now as cases are rising and the economic consequences are being felt in every family in America, more and more pain. So my hope is that Congress will make good on the promise we've seen over the last couple of weeks where Republicans and Democrats alike have come together to say, we do have a lot of common ground here. We actually agree on most of this stuff. Who wouldn't be for more money for vaccines and distribution? We need that. Who wouldn't be for more money for small businesses? Who wouldn't be for more money for people who are losing their jobs through no fault of their own and are struggling to pay the rent or pay their car payment? That's what this legislation can do, and I'm excited about that possibility. Meanwhile, in the first week of December, we've lost 13,726 Americans to COVID-19, compared to half that many in the first week of November. So in 1 month, we've had a doubling of the number of fatalities. At no point in time during this pandemic have we seen daily mortality rates like this, except in the early days in March and April when New York and New Jersey hospitals were being overrun. So we've got a real crisis. Of course, this healthcare crisis is having a direct impact on the economy, too. Even with these vaccines on the horizon, it's clear we've got to do more to help the economy get through this period of time before we're back to a more normal time. We've got to help in the short term to address the impact this healthcare crisis is having on families, on employment, on businesses, on schools, on nonprofits, and yes, on state and local governments. As I see it, our job is to provide that bridge so that the economic rebound that we have begun to see can continue. I'm concerned that the recovery we've seen, which has been called a K-shaped recovery, you like to see a recovery come in a V-shape where you have a recession, you lose jobs and economic growth, and then it comes back up the way it went down. It's called a V-shape. This has been more like a K. For some people, it's been okay. If you're a big box hardware store or grocery store in America, you're probably doing pretty well right now. If you're a small business, say a small retail store or a small restaurant that's a sit-down restaurant next to those big boxes, you're not doing okay. You may already be closed down. Your employees may already be unemployed. If not, you're hanging by a thread and hoping and praying that Congress passes legislation to help you. So it's been different for different people. If you've got a blue-collar job, you can't telework. If you're in the financial services industry, you're probably doing okay. But if you're working in a kitchen, making 15 bucks an hour, you're probably not. So it's different for different people in different sectors of our economy. I get that. For some, again, they're doing okay. For others, they are really struggling. Poverty overall is up because of what's happening. And this is sad to me. And we can see it in our communities. Go to your local food bank. See how many cars are lined up. How many people are waiting for 3, 4, 5, in Ohio, sometimes 6 hours just to get food for their families. Before the pandemic hit, we had very strong economic growth. I think the pro-growth policies we put in place here in Congress really helped. The tax reform, the tax cuts, the regulatory relief, using our energy, it all was working. We were having a period of growth that was strong, but also it was a very opportunity economy. People who had been on the sidelines for years were coming back into our economy. A lot of the benefits were being felt by lower and middle income workers. Let me give you an example. In February of this year, just before the pandemic started, we had 19 straight months of wage growth of over 3%. That's fantastic. We've been wanting that for a decade and a half in Ohio. We'd had flat wages, even not keeping up with inflation. Finally, we were seeing wage growth. And that 3% was compounding, and it was really helping people feel like if they worked hard and played by the rules, they can get ahead. Sadly, when the coronavirus hit, that ended. Before the coronavirus, the national poverty rate was the lowest in the history of America. In February, it was 10.5%, the lowest rate since we started tracking the statistic more than 60 years ago. That's the poverty rate. That's incredible. That's what we all want. After the initial wave of layoffs in the spring, Congress passed this Bipartisan CARES Act. That was 9 months ago. 9 months ago. But it included programs like the stimulus checks, expanded unemployment insurance. It actually helped drive the poverty rate down for a while. But since then, this continual economic pain, felt particularly by low and middle income Americans, combined with a lack of action on our part here in Congress to help them, has meant the poverty rate has actually gone back up since May by a significant amount. It now sits at 11.4%. That means that 7 million more Americans have fallen into poverty since the spring. 7 million. And when you fall into poverty, it's hard to get back out. As long as this economy remains partly shut down, and in some of our states it's largely shut down if you're in the hospitality business or travel business, as long as this happens, and we could see more shutdowns in the coming weeks and months, of course, if this crisis continues to worsen, we're going to see poverty levels rise unless we provide some relief. Along with the rising poverty rate, what's concerning to me is the fact that more and more people are just giving up hope. There's a stat called the labor force participation rate. It's the share of Americans who are over 16 years old who are either working or looking for a job. In February, we hit a 5-year high for labor force participation. That's a good thing. In other words, we had more people participating in the workforce than we'd had for 5 years. Unfortunately, it's gone back down. It was up to 63.4%. Now it's down to 61.7%. The October number works out to a labor force that has nearly 4 million fewer participants than it did in February. So just people participating in the economy has gone down. Why do we need this package? We've got a real problem on our hands. It's a healthcare crisis, but it's also an economic crisis for so many people. Unfortunately, a record number of women and older Americans are also having to leave the workplace due to either a lack of opportunity or the need to stay home with their kids. For a lot of women, not having child care is a real problem because their schools are closed. So this is driving people out of the workforce as well. This is bad news for businesses trying to reopen, but it's also bad news for our long-term economic health. People who can't find a way off the sidelines right now won't be able to help power the eventual economic recovery we all hope, and they'll miss out on the economic recovery that does happen. It's a bad position to be in, but we saw with last week's job report that hiring is slowing down, meaning that more people may slip out of the labor force. In all, we're still down 10 million jobs in America since February. So some of my colleagues have said to me, my town's doing great, or my state's doing great, or this industry's doing great. I get that. It's a K-shaped recovery. For some people, it's going well. But the fact is, 10 million people That's how many jobs were down since February. A further slowdown of the economy is going to be tough for these long-term unemployed, and my concern is we may never re-enter. Some may never re-enter the workforce without action here to help businesses start hiring again. Some of the hardest hit industries in our states, like the travel, the leisure, the hospitality industries, are facing real losses. Our airline industry is expected to have cut the equivalent of about 90,000 jobs by the end of this year. 90,000 jobs alone in the airline industry. I spoke to the president of American Airlines today. They're big in Ohio. He called. Guess what? He is really eager for us to pass this coronavirus legislation we're talking about. Really eager, because he needs it desperately to hold on to his employees. He doesn't want to furlough any more people, but he doesn't have the business to keep them working. According to a November survey from the American Hotel and Lodging Association, more than 70% of hotels have said that they won't be able to stay in business another 6 months without more assistance. 70%. Almost 80% said they'd have to lay off more people. And our restaurant industry lost jobs in November for the first time since April. A worrying sign that while restaurants were starting to pick up, things were getting better. In November, because of the news, because of the high level of cases and the concern people had of going out in public, and also, in some states, because of a government edict saying you can't open. In some places, they even said you can't have outdoor dining anymore, not just indoor dining. Think of what this does to those restaurants, most of which are small businesses, family-owned, and were already stressed. Some of those restaurants have closed their doors. I know some of them that are never going to reopen again. It's not just restaurants, it's bowling alleys, it's movie theaters, it's the place you get your hair cut. A lot of them are suffering. A lot of these challenges are going to get worse soon because a number of the programs we put in place in this pandemic to help provide relief to people struggling are going to expire. That's another reason we have to act, because at the end of this year, actually the day before Christmas, we're going to see some of these programs begin to expire. The Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program that helps the self-employed, that helps gig economy workers, people who would not normally be eligible for unemployment, to be able to step forward and get unemployment insurance, is going to end at the end of this month. That's something a lot of my constituents in Ohio have been depending on if they've lost their job through no fault of their own. The Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program that authorizes another 13 weeks of state benefits, helped by the federal tax dollar, that ends at the end of this month. And of course, there's a moratorium on evictions that ends at the end of this month. So the bottom line is that the people, state and local governments, the industries, the sectors of our economy that have been hardest hit to date by the economic crisis caused by COVID-19 are going to be the ones who are likely to be hurt most by a continued economic slowdown. As I said, these are problems that right now can only be fixed by all of us stepping forward. Congress needs to take action, and take action now. We've got about a week. Fortunately, again, I'm pleased to say that the proposal that's in the works on a bipartisan basis here in the Senate is going to help. It has a total price tag of $908 billion. You all heard that probably for following what's going on with this continued negotiation. But it helps everybody. It helps individuals. It helps families. It helps small businesses. It helps industries. It helps those hardest hit with targeted resources. It's focused. It's targeted. It's not the $3.5 trillion legislation that has been talked about over the last several months. It's targeted. It's focused. And actually, although it's $908 billion, it's really more like $350 billion because it takes back money that was spent in the CARES Act that was appropriated by this Congress and not used, and repurposes it for these purposes. So I think it's a focused, targeted effort that will really help. And again, what's exciting about it is that today there was a proposal made that says we have this bipartisan framework, very similar apparently, and my hope is that the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader here in the Senate, the Democratic leader here in the Senate, the Republican leader in the House, the President of the United States can all figure out how to get together and make this work. This bipartisan proposal that we're working on here, I think, does provide a good template. And by the way, all of those actors I talked about, all of those players, have said good things about that proposal. It has funding in there to extend the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses that targets those small businesses that need the help the most. And it's really more targeted this time. It has targeted relief for some of our hardest hit industries, including our airlines and our mass transit industry. It includes funds to help those Americans who have lost their job through no fault of their own. The unemployment insurance extension I talked about earlier. As a bridge to normalcy, we need this funding. It provides funds for state, local, and tribal governments based on their revenue shortfalls or their expenses due to COVID. In other words, need-based. We're also working on common sense liability reforms to give businesses, nonprofits, schools, healthcare providers, religious organizations, and others the legal protection they need to reopen with confidence that they're not going to be subject to frivolous lawsuits that could put them out of business. That's really important, because getting these businesses back up and running is a critical part of getting our economy through these next few months. So these protections are essential in my view. I'm hopeful that both sides can now come together and find common ground on liability protections that we can all support. Several of my colleagues are working on a proposal here right now in the United States Senate. All of this gives us hope that we'll have better days around the corner. By the way, this proposal is not what any of us would write. It's not the proposal I would write. It's not the proposal our presiding officer here in the chamber today would write. Personally, I would put more emphasis on tax incentives for hiring. We've got some good proposals for that. I would put tax incentives in place to get businesses to reopen safely, called the Healthy Workplaces Tax Credit, so that they could get compensated for putting up the partitions or for having the PPE and providing a safer work environment. I would expand the Work Opportunity Tax Credit to help those, again, who are on the sidelines, to bring them back into work through a credit. I would help with regard to the Employee Retention Credit that was in the CARES Act, which could pick up some of these companies that aren't picked up by the PPP program. They have slightly more employees, let's say, where they don't otherwise qualify. So there's more I'd like to do, but you know what? This proposal is needed. It's needed so badly that all of us, regardless of what our particular interests are or our particular ideas, of course we all know what's right, all of us should get behind. Let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. I would even say the enemy of the necessary. Targeted relief now, I think, is the right approach. Most importantly, all of these significant economic problems I laid out and the healthcare crisis I laid out need to be addressed now. As I said earlier, there's a light at the end of the tunnel for the health side of this crisis. And our proposal I've been talking about also helps us get there because it has more funding for vaccine development and vaccine distribution. I talked today to some experts in that area, know a lot more about it than I do, and they said it's necessary. We actually have to provide more funding to keep the vaccine train moving so that by March and April we'll have it widely available. And again, my hope is that Americans will step up and be vaccinated. By the way, there's also bipartisan legislation. 4 of us introduced last week, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, to provide for a public service campaign, not with politicians talking about the importance, as I'm doing tonight, but with the experts talking about why the science says that it's a good idea to get vaccinated. Again, just like we do for smallpox or polio or measles. Will another COVID-19 bill solve every problem we face right now? No. But we can do a lot with this proposal to help the most vulnerable individuals to just get by for the next several months, rather than slip into poverty, rather than missing out on mortgage payments, missing out on their rent, missing out on their car payment, and other bad outcomes. We can help the most vulnerable businesses keep their lights on and their employees on payroll. Frankly, this is work we should have been doing months ago, but we're here now. Let's get it done. My hope is that we can end this year by recapturing that spirit of bipartisanship that was on display in March of this year when we passed the CARES package here in the United States Senate by a vote of 96 to nothing. That doesn't happen very often. The CARES Act was not a perfect bill either, but we all recognize it was a bill needed for the moment. I hope we can also recognize that another bill is needed now, even if it's not perfect. Let's build on the bipartisan proposal we put forward, and let's ensure that the people we represent get the targeted economic relief they desperately need in the coming months. And folks, let's not leave for the holidays until we have done that. I yield back my time.